Hello, fellow women in wetlands people. Hello, everybody. Hello, students. It's nice to see you today. I hope you're really enjoying the conference. It looks like there's still a lot of cool things planned for today. But thanks for joining us for this portion of the meeting. We wanted to have lunch with y'all today to talk about career transitions. And it sounds like, you know, this has been kind of a running theme of several activities during this conference, so I'm sure that there's interest in it. We have heard from our Women in Wetlands section at our meetings, people really want to know more about different careers and moving from one career to another and how to make that move as gracefully and as efficiently as possible. So that's what we're here to talk about today. I have a couple slides that I wanted to share. So here's a list of our objectives. First of all, I wanted to share the theme of our luncheon discussion that's going to be coming up in 2021 in Spokane. We're going to provide some examples of talks that are going to pair with our luncheon that are going to happen during our symposium in 2021 in Spokane. And then what I'd really like to do is, after we go through the introductory work, for this group to do some hard work for us and come up with ideas for different career transitions that are interesting to this particular group, so we make sure that we address these when we go to Spokane for our conference and for our luncheon and our symposium. So please relax and enjoy a couple slides of the presentation here, but be thinking about how you might be able to help us contribute to this session in the future. So here we are at our luncheon in 2019, which was really great discussions and great food, and really wish we were doing that all right now in person, but alas. Let's proceed. This is going to be our theme for our 2021 luncheon. It's called Smooth Transitions at Any Career Stage. And I've just got the whole abstract up here for you. Basically, we want to acknowledge that navigating these careers in wetland science policy and management involves these different transitions throughout your career. And these might be university to full-time employment, industry to academia, single to family, career to retirement, and all of these transitions are things that happen differently for everyone and can rarely be predicted and mapped. And so that's why this discussion is so important. If we talk about individual narratives and personal case studies, we can, first of all, equip people with tools to navigate these transitions themselves. We can also promote understanding and facilitate how these transitions happen for colleagues and mentors, so that it's not a situation that we're unfamiliar with when we try and mentor or cooperate with other people in wetland sciences. And then it also can foster productivity by really normalizing the transitional career. Gone are the days that one person stays at a single institution for their whole life, it seems. And so these career transitions have always been important, but it does seem like in a rapidly evolving field that they're becoming increasingly important. So that's one of the reasons we wanted to focus on that for our symposium. So in this session that we propose next year, the presenters are going to focus on specific strategies for optimizing circumstances and taking advantage of any opportunities that come up as part of these transitions. So, so that's our theme. That's what we're going to be talking about. And as I mentioned, we will want to hear from this group after we go through a couple more presentations here. Be thinking about this. We'll ask you for your feedback. What transitions are important to you? And you can participate and share your insight in a bunch of ways. You can either raise your hand here on Zoom, and I can call on you, or somebody else can call on you who is better at paying attention to these things. You can use Slack and hashtag us at Women in Wetlands, so we are sure to see your suggestion. And then if we get off the call, or if you want to just use it right now, you can email at womeninwetlands@gmail.com, and that gets to us. So those are the different ways we can get your feedback, and we'll be looking for that in just a little bit. We will start by introducing, I'm going to introduce a talk that we're going to have by Anna Puchkoff. Anna has been active in this virtual conference, so it's been nice to know that she'll be bringing that perspective with her. She's a graduate student at University of Connecticut, but she spent several years working for U.S. federal land management agencies. So from Anna, we'll get to hear about making that transition from management back into academics. She'll note about different manager skill sets that have been helpful along the way, including the recognition of science-based decisions and how important that is to management. So she brings that to her academic pursuits. Other transferable skills include things like communication and organization and teamwork that she found helpful in her career and are now important in graduate school. And then I thought this, I loved when I read this in her abstract, and I'm really excited to hear more about how the challenges of grad school can be kind of smoothed out and be slightly less tumultuous if you have the background of having worked in management. So that for sure is going to be an exciting talk. Now we're going to have other members of Women in Wetlands Leadership tell you a little bit more about what you can expect when hopefully you join us in Spokane.
Yeah, so hi everybody, thanks for being here today. We have another speaker, Becca Downard, who is going to talk more about the transition from being a graduate student to being an environmental scientist working in the field for a state government. So she is now the wetland coordinator with the Utah Division of Water Quality. And her abstract explained that the interdisciplinary training she got in grad school really has helped her understand the policy landscape and as well as science, and then that socio-ecological system in which she now works. She also will talk a little bit about networking and what she did in grad school that actually allowed her to see different career opportunities and to interact with both scientists and managers while still in grad school, which sounded really cool. And then she said, you know, transitions can be really hard, and she has some tips to share on things like time management and also how to figure out when you're in a new job, in a new position, what is the scope of that new position, particularly when you're transitioning sectors. So she was going from academia to government, and, you know, clearly there were a few bumps along that path that she wants to share. And hopefully that will provide insight for everybody else who's thinking of making a similar kind of transition.
Thanks, Ariana.
All right. Again, thank you all for being here today. I'm going to introduce one of our 2021 symposium speakers, who is Rachel Hagar, who is actually, you've probably seen her name associated with some of our Women in Wetlands communications. She does a lot of, well, she does all of our social media for the section and does an amazing job on that communication piece for us. But her talk in Spokane is going to look at the transition from really grad school to career, and on that track of being a non-academic career, which is a little bit different for some of us that have, you know, gone through this grad school route. She is still finishing up her PhD while she's currently working as a NOS Science Policy Fellow with NOAA, where she's a communications specialist in the Office of Protected Resources, which is pretty exciting. So she's going to talk a little bit about that path between being an academic and then also working within the science policy, journalism, communication side of things. And you know, her abstract is going to look honestly at what that's like to find your path and how you can flounder before you smooth out and figure out what your path looks like. And she's going to talk about how that transition from academia can be hard when you're moving into a non-academic career situation, and the value of networking, which we've talked a lot about being one of the bonuses of being involved in a section like Women in Wetlands, and how to have conversations about the career that you really want. So we're looking forward to her talk in Spokane.
Thanks, Jen. Rachel. Hey.
Hi. How y'all doing? So I'm going to talk a little bit about 2021 symposium speaker Terry Doss, who has an even different perspective. She's looking at maintaining the same career for a long time. So essentially being a beginning person in a career all the way maturing into being a senior leader in a particular department. And Terry is going to present a talk called Moving from Multitasking to Mission, Growing Old Gracefully in the Workplace. And Terry is the Director of Natural Resources Management for the New Jersey Sports and Exposition Authority at the Hackensack Meadowlands. And what she contends is that growing old gracefully in the workplace is getting more difficult as we're having different changing norms, as well as this kind of upstart gig economy that can enable different consulting firms and others to not have as high value on those who have institutional knowledge and may have a different bottom line. And so what she found is that she was being able to be successful by transitioning from being continuously multitasking and trying to keep up with everything changing, but rather to focus and really be more present. And she's going to talk more about how she figured out to be more focused, more present, and less fearful about her future in her talk during the 2021 symposium.
I am currently trying to grow old gracefully in my workplace, so I really can't wait for Terry's talk. I've been at University of Florida since 2005, and it's a great place to be. So I think I'm definitely gonna need to hear more from Terry. So, okay, so that was just kind of a foreshadowing of the things that we are going to be talking about actively in that symposium. But I wanted to make clear that that is the symposium, and then the luncheon that we're going to have is going to follow up from that symposium. And our idea, the way that we had planned it for Quebec, but the way that we're going to have it for Washington is we're going to have discussion tables where you can actually select a table that's specifically going to be talking about a transition that's relevant to you or relevant to someone that you are working with. So we're looking for specifics here on what kind of transitions are important to you. And I see that we've got some advice as well as some transitions coming at us in the chat box. What about any hands being raised that people would like to register a transition that they are interested in? I do see in the chat, Stephanie pointed out that making the transition from the workforce back into school is increasingly more common. And that is a transition, I think you're right, Stephanie, that's going to be particularly relevant recently. And I just thought of someone who I know would be great to talk to about that. So a colleague of mine, Stephanie Verholst, who is also a Society of Wetland Scientists member. She was in consulting for 6 years and then came back to graduate school after actually consulting for 6 years, instructor at a college for 4 years, and then back to graduate school. So I think that I'm going to alert her to that we are interested in this transition and see if we can get her to participate in our session. Let's see, I'm scanning the chat. Ladies, help me if I miss any hands being raised, okay? David. Hey, David, how are you? David notes there's a transition moving from active duty military to a workforce pathway or an educational pathway. I really like the idea of hearing more about that transition too. I know, yeah, I've been in mentoring groups where we've heard about challenges and advantages to making that kind of a transition.
Yeah, and just to be clear, we're only going to be able to have so many speakers in our symposium, of course, but the whole idea is that at the luncheon, we will have hopefully even more opportunity to delve into more different kinds of transitions. So if you have a transition that you're particularly interested in talking about and you let us know, it's also ideal if you have any kind of suggestion of someone who could be at that particular table representing and helping to guide that conversation about that particular kind of transition. So I think the military back to, you know, whether it's school or another type of opportunity is a great suggestion, where we might be able to have a table or two devoted to that kind of transition. So these are great ideas, and we're looking for more so that we can have as many different transitions covered during that luncheon as possible.
Thanks for the clarification, Ariana. Okay, taking some notes.
We've got one hand up, Carrie.
Whitney. Hey, Whitney.
Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
So I guess I was just kind of wondering, as I'm an undergrad, and I've only been working in wetland science for about a year now, just easing myself into it. So I'm still learning, but my advisor mentioned to me that he's like, you know, if you aren't necessarily interested in academia, and if you want to transition into something that isn't, you know, you feel free to, like, don't be afraid if you change your mind. Not saying I do really like it so far, but he's just kind of throwing those options out at me. So I was just wondering what would be out there if I decided not to choose academia. I think I actually saw a woman, I really wish I remembered her name, and I really wish I would have watched her speak, but I think she was doing a webinar for SWS maybe in the fall, and she was doing something. She still, I think, had a PhD. She still knew everything about academia. I can't remember what she did, but I guess I'm just wondering what job opportunities would still be relevant and would still be able to work with wetlands. Hopefully that kind of makes sense.
No, that definitely does. And Whitney, I think that transition, even from undergrad to a professional career, it seems like of all the topical societies, Society of Wetland Scientists is one where we have a lot of people who can address that issue. It's nice to have the balance of practitioners and scientists that we do in our society. And so it absolutely is a great place to look at that kind of a transition. I think that could potentially be a pretty packed table at the luncheon. So maybe we need two. But yes, transitioning from an undergraduate track directly into a professional one, there's some really good conversations can be had there, I think, within our society.
And I think there's tons of opportunities to still do wetlands work. You've got a lot of people who are hired in the private sector doing a bunch of wetlands related work, sometimes doing restoration, sometimes doing delineation. There's a lot of private sector opportunities. There's also a lot of government opportunities at the state and federal level for sure doing wetlands work. Jen, maybe you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I can jump in real quick. Whitney, that's kind of the transition I made from grad school. I got my PhD and then I didn't necessarily want to be in academia, and I work at a nonprofit organization, which wasn't anything that was even on my radar when I was in graduate school, you know, kind of those other options for places that you can do work, but there are, you know, conservations, land trusts, nonprofits that even do research. So in my position, I'm a research director and I do wetlands research and have a team and kind of operate like an academic lab, but we're not an academic group. And so there, I don't think you see those options as much, but once you start looking around, and like the Land Trust Alliance group is a good group to kind of be involved in and watch their job boards, and you can see the kinds of positions you could get working, you know, for an organization like that. And then, you know, there are a lot of government opportunities. There's just, when you poke around, there's a lot of private research groups that you can kind of find. Then you're often working with a board that wants you to do work in a particular kind of way. So there's definitely balances, trade-offs between working in an academic field when you can kind of direct the research you want versus, you know, working for a nonprofit. But, you know, hopefully we can, next year when we do the symposium and the luncheon, we can get even more opportunities to connect with people that are in those kinds of fields. But I think the opportunities are there if you look. It's a great question. You're muted, Whitney. There you go.
There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your input. I'm super excited to attend the symposium and the annual meeting next year. So all of the ideas, the discussion table should be really good. So thank you.
Thanks, Whitney. We got some, Stephanie brought up that transitions for underrepresented minorities in wetland sciences would be a great discussion point. I think I really encourage us to focus on that transition. I think we've got a lot of people who would be interested in that. And then David suggests also international students coming to build a career in the US. I think that kind of a transition, I think that brings with it its own challenges, and to get some tips on how to navigate that from others who have done it before is a really good idea. And for those of you that are interested, there's a lot of really cool tips and resources being posted in the chat. Myself, I'm probably going to save that chat so we can just copy and paste that right into our table list for the luncheon next year.
We're also saving the chats, and I'm keeping track of some of the resources in the Slack channel. So if you're not on Slack already, do hop on there into the Women in Wetlands channel, and we'll be storing all of that information there for you.
Of course you are, Stephanie. Let's see, a lot of suggestions coming in. Ooh, this is a good one. Transitions from being out of the workforce due to family responsibilities and caregiving and raising children, or working after a period of disability. This I would be really interested in talking more about. I know that on search committees that I've served on recently, there's been more attention given to what they call non-traditional applicants, which are people who have had a break in the career, where historically that was considered quite a disadvantage. It's now being discounted by search committees. And so I think I would definitely like to hear more about that transition too. Yeah, a lot of tables at this point.
I like that last one a lot, Carrie, because I think we have a lot of discussions in Women in Wetlands about how you balance your career while you have children, or coming back right after you've had children, but I don't think that we've necessarily really hit that idea of having been away for an extended amount of time and coming back to a career. And so I think that would be really great to kind of see if we can find someone that can speak to that piece.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. From this group particularly, y'all are coming up with such good ideas for transitions. Don't be shy to don't be shy to pass on a name of someone that you think might be a good table leader, because we're just going to ask them. We're not going to force them to do anything, but if they are interested in hosting a table and further developing the discussion on this particular topic, it would be great to be able to make the connection through you. So please do go ahead on and pass on some names. What do you think, leadership? Anything else we need to share about the actual symposium and our preparation for it?
No, I don't think so. I think that if we have more time today and if people have questions they want to begin discussing with us, we could do that while also gathering ideas for next year. I think we could do either, but I don't know how we're doing on time. I forget if we have another half an hour.
We do. We have until 2 o'clock, but also, I think, Stephanie, there's a break from 2 to 2:15, right? So if people would prefer to share their ideas over the chat and over the Slack channel, we could keep taking those ideas and people could have a longer break.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we certainly can. I know it's a little bit harder to interact now because we've had to increase some security features on here, so people can't unmute themselves. I know sometimes it's hard to find that the raise hand function. So if anybody does have any more ideas or anything else that you'd like to add, please keep it up. We can kind of have a soft close to the session if you'd like. So everybody who is available to stick around and wants to keep letting these ideas percolate certainly could stay on the call.
I like that term, a soft close.
I just get inspired every time I'm with the women in wetlands. I learned micro-volunteering from what appeared to be Ariana riffing on the fly during a session a couple of years ago, and it is now my most favorite term for recruiting people.
Yeah, and I got to give credit to a colleague of mine, Melissa Kenny, who was the one who gave me that term. It's not my term, but I loved it immediately. So yeah.
It is so useful. I think micro-volunteering is actually really important when we're transitioning between careers, and especially when we're looking at how you build your network through societies like SWS and whatever other professional societies you're joining. Those micro-volunteering opportunities are what make people in those higher up places start to recognize your name, and certainly helps when you start going into interviews.
I completely agree. I actually responded to Ariana's call for micro-volunteering after a conversation with Joy Zedler, in which she said, I was transitioning to an associate professor position, and I just had a contact and I called her and she said, get yourself in there, get yourself into one of the sections, one of the chapters, and just volunteer, and you'll see these networks build. And I really took that to heart. And when I saw micro starting a new job, I loved it, I don't know if I'm a good micro volunteer though. I think I failed.
Macro. Quit macro quickly. And thank goodness you did. And you did a great job. But to your point though, Rachel, I think with everyone being stretched for time, especially as a student, and you're trying to, complete your classes and get your field work done and complete your research objectives, and maybe even you're mentoring some undergrad students, or you're trying to do an undergraduate research project, your time is very stretched, and so you have to maximize every effort that you spend on something to make sure that you get some return out of it. And I think thinking about that time restriction often limits people from volunteering, but in actuality, my experience has been just a little bit of time volunteering has disproportionate returns. Like I definitely get more than the couple hours that I've volunteered. I often have to work a lot harder to get the gains that I get just from using my network. So that's something to think about.
Yeah, it's certainly an investment. And it's a perfect analogy that, just like we try to invest to retire later, you put in a little bit at a time and it really builds.
Are Rachel and I starting to sound like a PBS commercial?
Yeah, let's talk about retirement tomorrow. Let me feel really
You can
old
get the
right now.
free tote bag. Can't help it, we're enthusiastic.
I think maybe something I know I've heard from a couple of people, given the current situation and sort of increased awareness about racial discrimination. I know yesterday we had a full initiative on Shut Down STEM, which unfortunately we were not able to participate in quite as fully because we had already planned this conference, and we made a judgment call as a section that it was more valuable to elevate those voices through this platform instead. But we certainly have a very long way to go as far as increasing representation within STEM and within our society and in all of our sections. So I think it would be interesting to hear a little bit more about those transitions and how you navigate those transitions in a workforce where increasingly the research is indicating that it's the odds are stacked against you if you're a person of color, especially if you're a Black person of color, Indigenous people of color. It's so much harder. And I know Women in Wetlands, especially, a big part of your mission has been from the outset to increase diversity and support for all underrepresented groups. So it'd be great maybe if you could speak to a little bit of that and how that might be integrated into the symposium next year and into the luncheon.
Yeah, the topic comes up often in our discussions about how this section can promote diversity, and we've had some really great suggestions, and they've ranged from mentoring groups to awards and scholarships, I can recall from some of our discussions, and I think we've got like a treasure trove of ideas waiting to happen within our section, I feel like. And I think the efforts to increase underrepresented races is I think it's something that's waiting to happen. We just need to have a micro volunteer to lead up the effort to help us implement some good work on that important initiative. And just kind of the way that I've been feeling and from hearing voices, I'd be surprised if that wasn't a part of our initiative in the coming years.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and part of what we have tackled in the past, like when we did the session on bias and how to try to develop panels or peer review literature and publish articles, etc., with less bias. We came at it from the lens of gender in that particular case, but many of the recommendations are just as easily applicable to any other underrepresented group that you want to make sure is actually a part of your endeavors. So just because I brought it up last night at the happy hour and then here too, one of the suggestions about peer reviews and journals is that women and underrepresented minorities fare better when we do double-blind reviews. So not just we don't know who the reviewers are, but you actually don't know who the person is who wrote the article. This reminds me so much of all of the evidence that, orchestra players, symphonies became far more diverse as soon as people auditioned behind a screen. So you didn't know if it was, a man or a woman or anybody else, of course, playing behind that screen. And so that really is the recommendation. And my understanding is the Wetlands Journal does not do double-blind review right now. So that was a suggestion we made that we were hoping the society would take into at least their thinking. And when it comes to putting together events like this, panel discussions, etc., you have to basically set an explicit goal that you want to have either a certain percentage representation of underrepresented groups, certain number, or just that you are very explicitly going to make sure that your panel is not, we were using the word that year, manels, because that is a thing where you have a panel that is full of only men.
It's a thing.
And so again, it's all about making these very explicit goals, that your goal is to have a diversity of people on the panel. And then we had some tips to share about how you go about doing that. You can't just come up with one name of one person whom you think is a superstar and you want on your panel, because then if they say no, it's very easy to fall back on, oh, well, she said no, and so as a result, we're just going to go back to our 5 male people we were thinking of and have a manel again, right? So you actually have to have a deeper bench. You have to have more names. You have to actually actively go out and recruit people. And so it can take a little bit more work, but then it's worth it because in the end, you have that diversity represented. And so a lot of that guidance, Stephanie, really goes, whether you're thinking about gender diversity or any kind of diversity, when you're organizing events or thinking about peer reviewing of articles, et cetera. It's all very, very similar in the way we approach how do we start to fix some of this.
Absolutely. And I know, at least for the student section, we've all been very tuned in really to the initiatives going down on Twitter this past couple of weeks, and honestly to voices that have been yelling for quite a long time and unfortunately have just been suppressed for so long. So I certainly think that we're at a point where we can really dive into those conversations in a much more critical manner. And I hope at least that a lot more people are working on themselves and on how they can sort of transform their departments. I know I've been very fortunate that I've come up in a time in academia where departments do have quite a bit of gender diversity, at least in the traditional male-female split. There's obviously a lot of work to be done with non-binary identifying and sexual orientation. But certainly from a gender standpoint, I've been quite fortunate compared to a lot of, probably several of you who were not even that far before me. So we've made great strides there. And I think the flip side to that is that I've had not a single Black professor ever. The only Black teacher I ever had was in 9th grade, and I only had her for 1 semester. So I think there's a great deal of help that is needed in navigating transitions, not only in terms of what is a person of color supposed to do in those situations, but also what can people who are not people of color do to support those individuals when they're interviewing, and how do we address these issues of implicit bias. So certainly that's something I look forward to hearing more from the Women in Wetlands section.
Yeah,
get off my soapbox.
No, I think, and Ariana, to your point that, I think a lot of the challenges faced by people of color are similar, and the data show up that the pattern is similar with women too, in that it's been described as a leaky pipeline, right? So like we seem to be doing better at getting undergraduate students, maybe even better at getting graduate students that are women and people of color. But as you move along the pipeline, you tend to see minorities and women drop out, where that's not the case for the counterpart. And I was doing some poking around because when Kathy Ewell shared with me the history of Women in Wetlands section and how it was formed in 2007 after this National Academy of Sciences report, I thought I'd do some sleuthing to check on kind of a more current situation, check on some more current numbers. And I found an article in Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences that suggests that the pipeline is still quite real, and despite efforts, this is from April 2020, these numbers, and it just is surprising the degree to which even not only in the United States but across the globe, there's still a kind of a systematic leaky pipeline along the way for women in academics particularly. So I thought it was interesting and encouraging that our work is definitely not done there in terms of promoting women in science and engineering, and then it's almost like a parallel scenario for people of color. So I do think that there's a lot that the section can do to contribute. It's been a while since I checked the Slack messages. I'm suffering from having too many windows open on my screen.
I know you all sort of briefly introduced yourselves at the beginning, but we'd love to hear more about sort of what each of you do in your day jobs when you're not micro or macro volunteering for Women in Wetlands. I know a lot of you have had some really outstanding experiences that I think speak well to these career transitions, not just the people that you're featuring next year at the symposium. So if any of you have anything to add there, I would love to hear it.
Thanks, Stephanie. What do you think, guys? Anybody else want to go first?
I can go. I didn't get to introduce myself at the beginning because my internet dropped me out of the meeting for a little bit.
And actually, none of us really introduced ourselves at the beginning. I got too excited and just jumped right into the material. Like, I saw my slide and I'm like, we got to go. We got to make this happen. So nobody has any idea who any of us are.
Why don't you start then, Carrie? Just kick off with some introductions and who you are, and I'll go.
What I meant to say, let's rewind. Pretend it's the beginning of the presentation. Thank you so much for joining us today, everyone. I am the chair of the Women in Wetlands section. My name is Carrie Reinhardt Adams. I am an associate professor at University of Florida. I came to the Society of Wetland Scientists when I was presenting my undergraduate research in actually it was 1997. It was. And it was a really exciting time. And I got my my undergrad at Penn State and was working with a group of people who were all active in the society too. And my poster won Best Student Presentation. I could still remember that feeling when I walked across the stage and all my lab was cheering for me. It was so great. And later I looked, somebody took a video. My gosh, I have the stupidest smile on my face. It's like stretching my skin. I'm like, anyway, I was really excited. I got hooked on Society of Wetland Scientists. I did my master's degree at Penn State too. Then I did my PhD at University of Minnesota with Sue Galadowicz, and I just rammed through all that without any stop. And then I was an instructor for a year at Washington and Lee University, rammed right through that for a year, and then got my position at UF as an assistant professor. And I got my job, and then I had 2 kids, and then I got tenure, and here I am, still at University of Florida. They haven't gotten rid of me yet, so. It is a great place to work. I never thought I would end up here. I totally took a chance because who moves to Florida when you're under 70? But it turns out it is just really, really cool wetlands and just a great place to do wetland science. And it's one thing about people moving to Florida from all different places is it's a really diverse scenario too. So it's a cool place to be. That's what I meant to say at the beginning. Thanks. Who's next?
I can go. Hi, everyone. I'm Jen Carberg. I am the, what are we calling it? The rising chair for the Women in Wetlands section. So coming up through the ranks, I've been involved in the Society of Wetland Scientists. I said this last night at the social hour, but I've been involved since I was an undergrad. My wetlands professor, who was Doug Wilcox, made us become members of the society. It was you signed up for the class and you bought a membership in the society for a year. And as a wetland, yeah, I know it's kind of a really great model for the society. but it was such a great thing for me as an undergrad who was discovering wetlands and loved wetlands and knew I wanted to work in wetlands to be a member of a society like this. And I've been going to the meetings since a very long time ago, and try and go every year. And I went to all of the student gatherings, and I went to, you know, like my local chapter meetings and tried to get involved in the local chapter. And just the idea of building all of the mentoring connections within Society of Wetland Scientists really kind of, it definitely helped my career. It connected me up with the grad program that I went into to do my research. And it actually, I got funding for my PhD research off of a presentation that I did at one of the wetlands conferences. I gave a presentation and I had somebody come up afterwards that said, if you want to continue this work for your PhD, I have money to do it in the parks around the Great Lakes region. So it's like those connections just have helped to drive what my career is, which is kind of amazing. I made the transition from academia to nonprofit work. I came out and with my PhD and really wanted to do research that I was applying directly to management. And that was the kind of position that I looked for, and that's what I do now. I work in more than just wetlands because I work for a land trust, but most of my research focus ends up being in coastal wetland areas. And that's kind of me in a nutshell. I had kids a couple years ago, so I went through that transition of working and maternity leave and kids and balancing career. And right now I'm actually going through the lovely transition of being a kindergarten teacher while also doing my career full time, which is a completely different kind of transition I didn't think I'd make. But yeah, that's me.
I think from now on, when I'm wishing students well, I'm going to wish that they have the fortune of you, Jennifer. That's amazing, being able to secure your PhD funding from a presentation you do at SWS or at another conference. I think that really speaks well to the importance of these networks.
And it's definitely part of that idea of putting yourself out there. You know, as a student, one of the best things that you can do, it kind of feeds into that micro volunteer, is how do you connect with people? How do you put what you're doing out in front of other people? And I am not, it might seem different right now, but I'm not an extremely social person. I don't love, you know, talking to brand new people all of the time. It's not easy for me, but going to meetings and being involved in sections and making sure that, you know, you are at least showing up to a meeting and putting your face there and talking is really, it's important. It gets you connected to the people you need to be connected to.
Rachel, you go, and then I can wrap up.
Okay, now I did it. Okay. So my name is Rachel Schultz, and I'm basically a super volunteer. Carrie gave me a fancy title. I think it was Symposium leader.
Symposium facilitator.
Oh, okay.
Like facilitating the whole thing.
Did I agree to this?
No, you just did it.
So yeah, so I've been involved with the Women in Wetlands section. Oh geez, I should know these things. I believe it was 2006. That's when I started my PhD, but I've been involved in the Society of Wetland Science since my undergrad in the early 2000s. And so my background is I did my undergraduate at Northland College on Lake Superior. So I'm definitely a Great Lakes person. I worked on all the Great Lakes except for Huron. And so I was trained and got the wetland bug in northern Wisconsin, Lake Superior. I then decided to go somewhere completely different. I did my master's in Germany, and I studied peatland restoration. That's what I really wanted to do. And also learned how to do gas sampling in Germany. Came back across the pond to do my PhD at The Ohio State University. I worked with Virginie Bouchard, who then left to go back to France while I was in my PhD. So I had that transition. Then I did my postdoc at Mississippi State University. Mississippi State. I don't know what I just said, but anyway, I went south. I really give you props, Carrie. I was not able to be in the South and do wetlands work. The cottonmouths just, anyway. So then I shot back up to the north. I got an assistant professor position at Plattsburgh State University, so one of the state universities in New York. I then had a kid, and my husband got his dream job, so we moved to Wisconsin, and I took an instructor position. But I honestly, I couldn't do it. And so I moved our family back to New York, and I am now in the position that Doug Wilcox retired to. So he was obviously a career-long scientist with the USGS, but he transitioned after he retired. He was really bad at retirement. 10 years at SUNY Brockport, where I am now, and I got his position as an associate professor of wetland science here, and it's been a dream come true. Honestly, it's been awesome. I just got my tenure letter last month. So, yep. Thank you. So, I've been through some rough spots, but honestly, if you're driven, there's amazing, and find your network, find people who love the same things you do, have a variety of mentors, because having one is great, but having many will give you more stability. And so I'm just so excited about this career, and excited about being more involved in the SWS and the Women in Wetlands section. Okay, now I'm turning it over to you, Ariana.
Awesome. That was cool. I learned a lot. That was really fun. Well, so I started out at Oregon State University, where I also fell in love with wetlands through a class, although I was not required to become a member of SWS. So that's very creative. I like that idea. And so then I actually, I ended up taking 2 years off between undergrad and grad school, partly because I was doing an undergraduate thesis, and I don't know how my friends who were doing research and writing up theses and applying to grad school did it. I couldn't do it. And I also wasn't totally sure where I wanted to go, and I needed some time to figure out where I wanted to go do wetland restoration research for my doctoral work. So I was a lab tech at Boston University for 2 years in a forest biogeochemistry lab with Adrian Finzi. And then I went back to grad school at Duke, and I worked in the Wetland Center there with Kurt Richardson. And then after my doctoral work, I got a postdoc at the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center. So here in Maryland, I've now been in Maryland for 12 years, which is actually really hard to believe when I start to do the math on that. So I finished my PhD in 2008, right as we were headed into the Great Recession, which now I'm sure will be dwarfed by the COVID-19 recession, whatever stuff. But 12 years ago, it was sort of the worst economic times people had seen in over a decade, for sure, if not longer. And so while I was doing my postdoc, it became really clear to me that a traditional academic pathway was not very likely to work out really quickly, because I was applying to the few academic jobs that were posting, but one school was really, really great. I'm so happy they sent me this letter, even though at the time I wanted to just burn it. But they told me I was one of 895 people to apply for the faculty position that I had applied for, a tenure track assistant professor position. So that's what stuff was looking like in 2009, 2010. And I mention this because some of you out there may be facing very stiff odds like this. If you're thinking of a transition, or if you're finishing up either undergrad or grad school, it is really rough. If you finish and you're kind of at the prime of your hireability, and yet the world, the economy, everything is, in shambles, and that's not your fault, but it happens. And so I basically decided that this whole being one of 895 people thing really wasn't a good idea for the near future. And so I was applying for other research postdocs, but I also applied for the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship. And in my second year of my postdoc at the Smithsonian, that fellowship came through, and I was finding out that I was going to be able to have that fellowship. And when I contacted everybody with whom I'd applied for a research fellowship for another postdoc, they all said, we don't know yet, and if you've got a sure thing, you should say yes to the sure thing. So I decided to sort of go on a different path and to try that science and policy fellowship, and I ended up loving it. I was at NOAA for 2 years in the National Marine Fisheries Service in the Office of Habitat Conservation, and then things were still pretty tough during my 2 years of fellowship. The economy was recovering, but there were still not a lot of jobs. And I ended up getting recruited by the chief scientist of the National Ocean Service to stay at NOAA, but to move line offices and to come work with him for a number of years. He retired about 2.5 years after I went to work with him. I was at NOS for about 5 years. You know, transitions sometimes are by choice, but as I've mentioned, transitions are also often driven by external factors. My supervisor, but also really mentor in the chief scientist at the National Ocean Service, Paul Sandifer, when he retired, everything changed for me at the National Ocean Service. And then we had another turnover of leadership in the National Ocean Service. So we had a change in assistant administrator. And the new administrator wanted to go lean and mean and really wanted to slim things down. And so I suddenly found myself in a situation where they were not going to renew my grant to be able to continue working at the National Ocean Service. And so even though I didn't really want to leave, there weren't a lot of options for staying. It was right as the Trump administration was coming in. And so everybody was very uncertain about the future of different parts of NOAA and the federal government in general. So I ended up spending 2 years then at the Maryland, DC chapter of the Nature Conservancy. So I transitioned again so I've kind of transitioned from academia to government or quasi-government academia, because I was sort of doing both while I was at NOAA for the last 3 years, and then into the nonprofit sector. I am now a visiting associate research professor at the University of Maryland, and I'm also dabbling in the private sector. So let's add another sector to my list, because I am the lead ecologist for TBD Economics, which is a consulting firm that does a lot of coastal and ocean work. So I've worn a lot of different career hats, and where I currently am is probably not a permanent spot. I'm not in a position that feels like it's the long-term home I'm looking for yet. So I am actively undergoing a transition that I'm still working through. But because I have had all of those different sectors, experience in all of those different sectors, I am more than happy to chat with any of you who have questions about any of those sectors, or what I found that worked really well and what I found really challenging. So I will say that my very varied career path means that I can be a particularly good resource for students or postdocs or people who are trying to figure out what do they want to do next, because I've had a lot of different experiences.
Absolutely, and I can definitely attest to that. Ariana has helped me through a few of those hurdles. So I certainly recommend you contact her and anybody else who was on this panel. That was fantastic, ladies. Thank you so much.